Good evening, everyone, and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. We are honored to host this important event on behalf of the U.S. Council of Muslim Organizations. Tonight, we aim to discuss the Gaza ceasefire and the next steps in advocating for peace, rebuilding, and justice. For over 15 months, 471 days, we watched as a genocide unfolded in Gaza. 47,000 confirmed murdered, with tens of thousands still unaccounted for. This genocide, conducted both by the Israeli government and the Biden administration, was a testament and showed us the need for humanizing Palestinians here in this country. And as we approach almost just a little bit over a week after the ceasefire has begun, we see people now finally returning to their homes in the north, finally attempting to rebuild their lives. Tonight, we plan to discuss the ceasefire and the path forward for us here as activists, as those who believe in justice for Palestine here in this country, with a star-studded cast of scholars and activists from around this country who will help guide us in understanding what took place and how we move forward. We begin today with Josh Paul. Josh Paul is a former State Department employee who resigned due to the Biden administration's refusal to stop arming Israel during the genocide. He was the first employee, first member of the administration to step out. We thank him for everything he's done. Josh Paul, now a human rights activist, the president of A New Policy. Josh Paul.
Thank you, Mohammed, for that very kind introduction. It's really an honor to be with you. And thank you, of course, to AMP, AJP Action, CARE and CARE Action, and of course, the US Muslim Council for pulling all of this together. So this first panel is a political analysis of the ceasefire and keeping the peace. And I think it's probably useful to just start with a quick review of what the ceasefire agreement constitutes. Let's start by recognizing this is an agreement that has been in almost exactly its current form on the table since at least May. The fact that it took this long to get to it, and ultimately this little pressure from the incoming Trump administration, frankly, is a testament to the inhumanity of the Biden administration and their unwillingness to use any of the leverage they had to get here. But where is here? Where are we? So, as you mentioned, we are now about a week into this agreement. This is a three-phase agreement. Phase one, which is to last 42 days, which takes us to February 26th. So that's the date to keep an eye on. Involves the release of some of the Israeli hostages, women and children in particular, for Israel to release 1,900 of its Palestinian hostages, or Palestinian political prisoners, I think is also a useful term to use here in terms of how the world thinks about political prisoners, for the admission of humanitarian aid, and for IDF withdrawal from populated areas and the Netzarim corridor, but not from the Rafah corridor at the bottom, at the south of Gaza, or from its borders. Phase two, theoretically, and we'll talk about why this is theoretically, is an agreement that the ceasefire is permanent. The release of remaining Israeli hostages, further releases of Palestinian hostages and political prisoners, and a complete IDF withdrawal from Gaza. And then phase three is a return of any bodies of hostages held by either side, and then Gaza reconstruction, which of course is going to be a many year effort. I think it's important to note that there are significant risks, both to the future of the agreement and to what the agreement represents for the broader political process. The most immediate question is whether we are going to get to phase 2 on February 26th. Ministers within the Israeli government, including Smotrich, have said that they will pull out of the coalition if Israel moves forward on phase 2. I think in that context, we note that Prime Minister Netanyahu has agreed to come to, at Donald Trump's invitation, the White House here in Washington, D.C. next week on February the 4th. And I think that he will be coming seeking a quid pro quo, which is, hey, this is, I think, what he will say to President Trump. I've got all this trouble from my coalition. If you want me to be able to move into phase 2 of this ceasefire, you're going to need to do things for me. Now, what will those things be? I think we can speculate. They probably include an executive order and sanctioning of the International Criminal Court to protect Prime Minister Netanyahu and his cohort. They probably include a commitment to conduct a joint military operation with Israel against Iran. And they probably also include an expansion even further of US military assistance for Israel. I think that's probably the deal that Prime Minister Netanyahu will bring on February 4th in order to get his own agreement to extend the ceasefire past February 26th. And so I think we all need to be thinking about what we make of that sort of a deal and how we can convince the administration, the Trump administration, that it is a bad deal and that America has the leverage in place to force Israel, to push Israel to extend the ceasefire agreement beyond, into phase 2 without agreeing to these things. Final thing very quickly is, of course, the ceasefire is also, and has been for many months now, a distraction in some ways. Yes, it's vital. Yes, it's urgent. Yes, the flow of humanitarian assistance is vital. But nothing has changed in the underlying political dynamic of the Palestinian situation. And there needs to be an international effort, and an effort led by the international community to compel real, genuine, measurable progress towards a just and lasting solution. And we cannot take the absence of conflict as the presence of peace. There must be the presence of justice, and there must be real political steps towards peace. And then a final thing as well, of course, is that in all of this context, we've also seen the horrific words of President Trump in just the last couple of days of this notion that, the Gaza Strip should just be, quote unquote, cleaned out. And when, President Sisi of Egypt today pushed back very forcefully on that, we now see the US administration reportedly talking to Indonesia and to Albania, amongst other countries. This, of course, is unacceptable. This is American participation in ethnic cleansing, should it go forward. And this is also something that must be very clear is not an option. Of course, any people in Gaza who wish to move to a place where they can feel safer, get the services they need, should be free to do so. But the people of Gaza, we saw in just the last 2 days in stunning photos and videos, voted with their feet, and they voted to return to northern Gaza. So I'll leave it there for now, Mohammed. Thank you.
Thank you, Josh. And moving on with our program, we move on to Dr. Hatem Bazian. Dr. Hatem Bazian is the chairman of American Muslims for Palestine, as well as an author and scholar on Palestine. Dr. Hatem.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum. Literally, I just walked out of my class, and long and behold, the lecture was on settler colonialism, motherland satellite colonialism, and the theory behind the framing of settler colonialism and what do we experience. I was discussing the long history and trajectory. But when we're dealing with the development in Palestine, we always have to make sure that we actually speak for long historical durée in order to make sure that we're speaking about 100+ years, beginning from 1917 up to this current period, the erasure of the Palestinians, the attempt to transfer the Palestinians out. And I always mention that Herzl plan from the get-go is to transfer or to spirit the penniless Palestinian population or Arab population across the borders to neighboring countries. And that's been a plan that was also in the 1930s. The transfer plan that was put forth by the major Zionist parties and organizations in Palestine. It was attempted in 1948 with the Nakba, committing at the time, at least what we have documentation, of 120 massacres that were committed to force the Palestinians out and cause them to flee, whether fleeing into Gaza, where the majority of the population are from the 1948, or to flee into Lebanon, where they are still are living in refugee camps, and then continuing with the attempt of 67, another expulsion taking place. So the idea of transferring the Palestinians out is a constitutive part of Zionism, of Zionist ideas, plans, and finding, quote, a solution to Israel's problem, which is this notion of demographic problem. During the Oslo Agreement, there was one of the committees was to deal with the refugee, the multi-party or multilateral committee on refugees, and the participating countries, their plan of dealing with the Palestinian refugees was not the right of return, but actually to try to ease the pressure in Israel by seeing if countries take some Palestinian refugees here and there. And I think what we need to focus on, this notion of erasing, bypassing, transferring the Palestinians, has to be dead on the water, whether it comes from Biden, Trump, Netanyahu, or any of the figures in here, whether it's civil society, academia, and so on. So that's a first principle that we have to deal with. The second is what is after the ceasefire. The ceasefire is a momentary step that with the exchange of hostages, both on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side. But what we need to assert that all of the difficulties that are there and the challenges are there is directly an outcome of the attempt to erase, bypass, and expel the Palestinians out of their indigenous home and indigenous land. The fact that we're witnessing the images of almost 250,000 to 300,000 walking back into northern Gaza is a sufficient, not if there's evidence needed, but sufficient clue and image for anyone that attempts to bypass the Palestinians. And as we are witnessing this in front of our eyes, the idea of asking Egypt, Jordan, or any countries, Albania or Indonesia, to be a co-participant in the ethnic cleansing is beyond even comprehension, let alone being planned. I do, again, understand that Biden, even in his own early stage engagement, wanted to see if Egypt or Jordan, at the time they were selling this idea of a temporary moving Palestinians. But as we understand, there's no such thing as temporary when it comes to the Palestinians and the plans for erasure and the attempt to bypass the Palestinians, including the Abraham Accords, which I'm going to set aside because that's a different conversation altogether. What do we need to do in here? And I think that is the very critical question. One, I do think that we have to continue to be not only doubly active, but quadruply active on the Palestine front. I don't think we could rest. We could actually feel that since there is a ceasefire, this is what is taking place, and the Palestinian struggle is coming into a sense of normal. We have to understand that the normal is the abnormal in the sense of what is taking place, not only in Gaza, but we know exactly that in the West Bank now, the whole attack on Tulkarem, on Jenin, in parts of Nablus, on Balata refugee camp, even the attempt to erase whole villages right next to Beit Lahem. So what we have is to understand that this is a full press. So we need to continue to engage simultaneously. Second, we need to begin to actually make and expose the linkages that is occurring, that AIPAC should not have its say in determining U.S. policy and U.S. outcome in relations to the region. And it's not coincidental that Miriam Adelson was just right there in the inauguration, right behind Trump, having center stage, somebody that actually paid $100 million to support Trump's campaign on the premise of asking Trump to annex the West Bank, at least area A and B. So we need to actually expose AIPAC, Miriam Adelson, and all of the parties that are pushing for to literally reward Israel, reward the settlers, reward the genocide and those who engage in genocide by allowing or permitting this annexation. So I think we need to make sure that that is part of our discourse and our engagement, and to actually begin to ask politicians to commit themselves to not taking a penny from AIPAC while exposing these linkages, including the current grouping that is pushing and asking for this. Third, I do think we need to recommit ourselves to a broad strategy on the PDS front, the boycott, divestment, and sanction, but more importantly, to actually begin to challenge major retirement funds that have purchased Israeli bonds and purchased and invested in Israel as a way to try to provide Israel economic support. And I do think that for many of us who have retirement funds that from at least public institutions, we do have legal standing to actually say that these institutions are not actually following fiduciary responsibility by investing and putting our money in a state and a political leadership that is under the ICC facing a genocide, which means that these funds might be liable in the long run. So we need to take the PDS with companies very clearly, but also move and actually direct some of our attention in the PDS movement on the front of retirement funds and retirement account. Lastly, and I think others will add, I do think that we have a major responsibility to continue to collect and document and provide as much information so the genocide that have taken place will be something that will be at least documented, challenged, and I know that there's many efforts underway for public tribunal on Gaza, but I think part of the public tribunal is collecting the evidence and documenting the evidence, and just to say positively that this was a genocide that was live streamed. So there is much evidence, but it has to be organized, categorized, testimonies and primary sources received, translations from Arabic for some of the individuals and families that are impacted. And that would require a large amount of volunteers and commitment of our own civil society, our own communities, in order for us to actually make sure that the genocide will be taken into account, those individuals who committed the genocide, those who were complicit, those who have taken a part, which also involves academic institutions that have remained silent. So part of it is actually bringing all these resources and materials to the forefront to be able to be at least understanding that this documentation and this advocacy on the genocide front is a non-stop, but it actually needs that work to be undertaken. So thank you, and let's continue our work.
Thank you, Dr. Hatem, for those words and for helping us look at the bigger picture in this moment. Our next speaker is Phyllis Bennis, a activist, author, and a program director at IPS. Phyllis Bennis.
Thank you to all of you who have been part of our discussion tonight. Since my colleagues have opened up so well with some of the initial stuff, I want to just concentrate on two things. One is what has happened so far with the ceasefire. And then secondly, to talk about a little bit our movement and what we need to be doing. So on the question of the ceasefire is not holding all that well. As we know, more than 100 people More than 100 people Israel has killed since the ceasefire was announced. So the notion that this is stopping the killing is not yet underway. There has been an improvement, obviously. There is now humanitarian goods being allowed in. We don't know for how long that will last. We don't know what will happen on the 30th, at the end of this week, when Israeli laws prohibiting any engagement with UNRWA go into effect, whether it will continue to be possible to get that material into Gaza. So what has all this meant? Israel has certainly not won the war that it has been waging, the genocidal war that it has been waging. It didn't win its early goals. Remember, its early goals, even before October of last year, Israel was working on a goal of emerging as a normal part of the so-called Western democracies. It was going to be right up there with Europe, the US, Japan, South Korea. It was going to be just one more in the normal sense. That's done. That's no longer the case. The legitimacy war that Israel has been waging for so many years, they've lost it through this genocide. And I don't think they're going to be able to reclaim that position. They were also working on the Abraham Accords, trying again to normalize their relations with Arab countries, particularly leaning towards, can they get the crucial relationship with Saudi Arabia? It looked like the Saudis were a little more interested than they had been in the past. That's done. That's not going to go forward at this point. And the specific goals that they set right after October 7th, when they said, our goal is to eliminate Hamas. Well, that has not happened. Hamas survived. Too many people inside Gaza have not survived. I'll get to that in a minute. But the goal that Israel set for itself militarily was lost. They have had a qualitative loss of legitimacy in this legitimacy war, especially among young people, most noticeably here in the United States, but also around the world. An extraordinary statement, many of you may have heard it, from the outgoing US ambassador to Israel, Jack Lew, who was talking about the influence of social media and the international media, the effect of genocide. And he said, you go to the international space in the media he's talking about, all you see is the civilian impact in Gaza. That is absolutely crucial. And what it has led to has been a massive shift in US public opinion, to the point where now 61% of Americans across this country and 77% of Democrats say that the US should send no more arms to Israel. That's extraordinary. We've never seen anything like that before. In the Senate, we saw 40% of the Democrats in the Senate 3 weeks ago saying no to an additional set of approvals that Biden had made of new weapon shipments to go to Israel. Those 19 senators who voted no on those letters, it was not enough to stop it. But we have never seen that level of opposition coming from officials in Congress. So there's been a giant shift. It's very much a generational shift. Again, something that Jack Lew said. He said, and I quote here, Joe Biden is the last president of his generation. He's talking about in the United States. You can't ignore the impact of this war on future policymakers, not the people making the decisions today, but the people who are 25, 35, 45 years old today, and who will be the leaders for the next 30 or 40 years. That's where we're seeing the change. That's huge. So Israel is losing and has lost enormous credibility on a global scale. I don't think we can say that the Palestinians have won this war. Hamas survived, yes. The triumph of Samud, the ability of Palestinians to survive, has been an extraordinary thing to see, but too many people did not survive. The allies of the Palestinians are weaker in some ways in the region. They were never very helpful allies to begin with, but they are weaker now. And we are seeing that Trump is encouraging, as we've been hearing already, the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. The invitation, I absolutely agree with what Josh was saying about the invitation to Netanyahu. Netanyahu would be the first foreign leader to visit Trump in the White House. But the US was already supporting ethnic cleansing. This is not new. It is more overt. It's more clear. But as we see the 350,000 Palestinians going back to their homes, what they are finding in the north in particular, but in southern Gaza as well, Gaza has been turned to rubble. And what is going to happen, we still don't know. The reconstruction of Gaza under occupation, because under the best of conditions, if all three phases of this ceasefire hold, which is a big question, but if they do hold, they will remain with Gaza under occupation, besieged. It will not end apartheid. So there is still an enormous amount of work to do. But what have we accomplished? And this is what gets to the movement here. And this is what's so important for all of us. We have a stronger movement than we have ever had before. And there are now two parts to that movement. The Palestinian rights movement that has been around for decades is stronger than ever before. It has gained enormous influence, and it is bigger and stronger than it has been. And separately, the ceasefire movement, which is broader than any Palestinian rights movement we've ever seen in this country, where literally hundreds of thousands of people, probably millions of people at this point, consider themselves in some way part of the ceasefire movement. The discourse will never be the same as a result. One of the things that that ceasefire movement did, along with a kind of message discipline that the Palestinian rights movement was only sometimes capable of maintaining, but that ceasefire movement kept the focus on ceasefire even while redefining what ceasefire means. So at the beginning, ceasefire meant stop the bombing. But now, ceasefire means far more than that. Ceasefire, the ceasefire movement, what it stands for, what it demands, only starts with stop the bombing, stop the tank fire, stop the attacks. Then it goes to the massive level of humanitarian aid that has to get in. Start funding UNRWA again. Stop the Israeli efforts to prohibit UNRWA from doing its job. All of that is number two. And number three, stop the arms transfers. Stop selling, stop giving arms to Israel. There has never been this level of public support, public demand for ending military support from the United States to Israel. This is extraordinary. When you combine that with the loss of Israel's credibility and legitimacy around the world, the fact that in the International Court of Justice, it is now being held accountable for the possibility of genocide as well as for crimes against humanity in the International Criminal Court. Our movement's job is to strengthen the work of those courts, strengthen that global movement in the context of this newly challenged international legitimacy that's pretty much over for Israel, strengthen the movement for Palestinian rights, support all three parts of the demands of the ceasefire movement, broaden it, as we were hearing from Hatem, the BDS movement needs to be strengthened. We need to build the anti-apartheid component of all of these movements, and we need massive solidarity to help Palestinians rebuild their lives that have been so shattered by this. And the last thing I will say that I think is going to be a new challenge for us. There is a huge movement rising right now against the ravages that in just 1 week we have seen coming from the new president in the White House, that are destroying people's lives and threatening to destroy more lives across this country, lives of immigrants, lives of poor people, lives of trans people. In all these ways, we are seeing enormous attacks, and there is an enormous movement rising to meet that challenge. We are part of that movement, and our work in support of Palestine needs to take place in the context of that movement. We are not outside of it, saying, you people work on stopping what Trump is doing. Our job is Palestine. Our job is part of that same movement. And we need to link our movements together. We have clear links with the immigrant rights movement, with the legacy peace movements. The movements several years ago, some of you may remember the giant movement for immigrant rights that was held. And one of the key slogans was, from Palestine to Mexico, all the walls have got to go. At that moment, the focus was on the walls being built on the US southern border and the walls that were being built to facilitate apartheid in Palestine. That was a great slogan, not only because it was creative, but because it made the links between those components of our movement. That's what we need to do. We need creativity, we need slogans, and we need action that puts us and the issue of Palestine right into the movement challenging what Trump is trying to do that is already destroying so many lives in this country. We're not separate from that. We can't stand outside of that and say we have something else to do. What we are doing is part of that, and we have a whole lot of work ahead. And we have an opportunity to do it in a way that we have never had before, with conditions that are better in many ways than we have ever had before. And we have a lot of people counting on us and a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Phyllis. And just to echo that, there has never been a moment since 1948 where we have seen this much public support for Palestine here in this country. We've seen the movement for justice in Palestine grow incredibly over the past 15 months. Moving on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is Nihad Awad, the Executive Director of CARE.
Good evening, brothers, sisters, friends of Palestine, friends of justice. We're talking about the ceasefire. Is it a ceasefire? Or is it a pause of the bombing and the killing on the Palestinians? Is it permanent or temporary? We, you, and many people, especially the Palestinians, they wish that it is permanent. But we've seen all the attacks on Gaza. They were just pauses for the past, 16 years. Every 2 years, they will launch a major attack on Gaza. This has been the biggest, in addition to the siege on the whole strip of Gaza. But right now, while the bombing and the killing has paused, what the Palestinians are doing, if you do not see the news or you see maybe some images here and there, but just to get you a feeling of what's taking place on the ground. As everyone said so far, that hundreds of thousands of Palestinians are going back on their feet. Most of them, the overwhelming majority of them, are walking on their feet and carrying all their belongings on their head, especially men and women. And children are just carrying also whatever they can. And I like exactly what Josh said. The Palestinians are speaking and voting with their feet. And this is the biggest response to a crazy idea by Trump that, it should be cleaned out. I think he should clean out his head from bad and wrong ideas. Palestine is for the Palestinians. I heard an older lady today, when she was asked, what's your feeling? She was just carrying a whole package on her head and just walking. And she was just like, breathing hard as she was walking. And the reporter asked her, what's your feeling? She said, this is the best feeling in my life. She may have lost so many members, and maybe many members of her family were injured, and maybe her home is destroyed, but she's walking maybe towards the destroyed house. It could be miles, it could be dozens of miles, but she's not given up. And that's really the spirit of the Palestinian people. In the next few days, as we have seen, they are not only going to their obliterated homes and infrastructure and schools and even hospitals, they're going to be digging their loved ones. Many of them have decayed. Many of them maybe have disintegrated. They will be digging up bones of their loved ones, their children, their husbands, their wives, their sisters, their siblings, their cousins, their family members, maybe their neighbors. So much memory, so much human stories are there. They're overcoming all of this because they are going to feel the victory that everyone has been seeing on national televisions and social media. Let me say this. Israel obviously has destroyed Gaza, has obliterated Gaza, has killed and maimed hundreds of thousands of people. The infrastructure, the schools, places of worship, especially hospitals, municipalities, every aspect of civil life has been destroyed by the state of Israel strategically and systematically. So they really destroyed Gaza. They broke the infrastructure and the structure. But as you can see from the faces of the Palestinians throughout the 14 months and in these days, the Palestinians have not been broken. And this is the biggest defeat to Netanyahu, to his army, to his government, and those who supported him and continue to support him. The Palestinians are unbeatable. They don't understand this. They can't understand, despite the killing, despite the maiming, I have not seen a Palestinian, complaining except to God and thanking God for what's happening to them. I'm not minimizing the suffering. They're heartbroken, but their spirits are not broken. So the result of this is Israel has lost militarily, strategically, politically, reputationally, and that loss is irrepressible. It will take Israel generations, and it will not succeed to erase the images that the world has seen the true face of the state of Israel. And as has been said, the shift in the public opinion is profound, not only among young people, but also middle-aged people and voters. Definitely the 11 million people who did not vote for the Democratic presidential ticket. Yes, some of them are Muslims and Palestinians, but the rest of them are just human beings who knew that Gaza was on the ballot. And recent polls have shown that Gaza caused the Democratic leadership to lose the elections. And Trump was the one who really pushed for the ceasefire. And I'm not defending him, by the way, had Kamala Harris won the election, the genocide would have continued. Why? Because they do not value humanities. Doesn't mean that Trump values humanities, but Trump knew how to win the election. When he visited the community in Michigan and Hamtramck 4 times, Democrats dismissed the complaints, the threats from the Muslim voters and young people around the country. They dismissed them and they favored the pro-Israel PAC money, and that cost them a lot. This is the first time where AIPAC and its affiliates and the millions of dollars did not help the presidential candidate. And that is a lesson for Democrats to reckon with. And for the leadership, it is an opportunity for them to start changing course. And Palestine has become and should be a partisan issue. I hope it should not be. It should be a bipartisan issue. That justice for the Palestinians, human rights for the Palestinians should be a bipartisan issue. But today, especially for Democrats, they have to decide if they will continue to be losers. And they have a chance to reconsider and put human lives above lobbying money and bribes that they have been used to taking from the pro-Israel organizations. I'm moving forward. I was asked to talk about challenges facing the pro-Palestine movement. But before I talk about that, it is more important that we have to celebrate the growth of the pro-Palestine movement and protect these successes and add on them. Even under the Trump administration and Republican-controlled House and Senate, we have a lot of room to work with to consolidate the successes that we have and normalize free Palestine and human rights for the Palestinians. Make it normal that ending the U.S. military aid to Israel is an American agenda, is in America's interest. And we have to fight for this and we have to promote for it. Also, we have to expand our BDS work. Do not give up. It is working globally. It is working in the U.S. And that is one of the biggest weapons the pro-Palestine movement around the world have. And Israel and its allies fail. even here in the United States. They passed legislation to prohibit punish people who are part of the BDS movement. We have sued the state of Texas twice, and we have sued other entities, and we succeeded on First Amendment free speech grounds. So BDS is one of the most strategic and effective tools that Israel and its allies cannot win, because it is up to us as buyers to choose what to buy. So what we need to expand to, we need to ask and pressure more universities to divest from Israel. We need places of worship, more churches, more synagogues, to make sure that they divest from the state of Israel. Corporations, religious institutions, even entertainment industries. Whoever has the potential or already working and making business with Israel, they have to be pressured to stop that. In addition to that, we just want to make sure that our towns, cities, and states divest from the state of Israel. We have a long way to go, but it has been working. And let's normalize the BDS and ending apartheid as the world community managed, especially in the United States, to end apartheid through economic and political pressure. Finally, I would say there are a couple of challenges that the pro-Palestine movement may face, but also they have to think about it strategically, is HR 2425 that gives it has not passed, but it will be reintroduced for sure under Republican control House and Senate. This bill is designed to empower the Secretary of Treasury to take away nonprofit license from organizations, mainly those who are pro-Palestine. It might go into effect maybe sooner than later, but our approach to it should be in terms of calmness. We have to be diligent. We should not be afraid. It is designed to intimidate you because you have been powerful and effective. The only way they can just silence you is these intimidating tactics. But despite that, you have to make sure that you adopt the best nonprofit practices as an organization. Make sure that your books are solid, that you have an auditor. And if you feel that you are the target of this law, if it becomes a law, immediately contact an attorney. Contact CARE, and we are ready to help you. The last thing I would say is we need to lobby our members of Congress. I just came back from a meeting with physicians and medical professionals who came from Palestine. We need to lobby our members of Congress to allow humanitarian aid into Gaza, medicine, medical equipment, and humanitarian and medical missions, because there are hundreds of thousands of Palestinians who are injured. And lastly, as we advocate, we have to make sure that normalizing peace and justice for Palestine should be done with ending and lifting the siege on Gaza, and have an independent, democratic Palestine on the land of Palestine, not in other places. Thank you.
Thank you, Nihad. We now transition to Maryam Uddin. Maryam Uddin is the legal director of the MLFA, the Muslim Legal Fund of America. Maryam.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I want to give a big shout out to Robert and Edward at CARE for allowing me to give my remarks on behalf of the Muslim Legal Fund of America at this important convening tonight. I am honored to be among the members of this panel. I truly have a deep respect and admiration for every single person. I am not going to lie, I had some pretty brilliant remarks prepared, but I think it's going to become painfully obvious that Josh stole them. So with that, this 13-day-old ceasefire should alleviate the suffering of civilians and establish a permanent humanitarian corridor, allowing the safe transit of humanitarian aid. But I think it's safe to say it's a token and pathetic gesture, and as CARE signaled, far too little, far too late at best, and a hoax at worst. Either way, it has increased the need for our engagement more than ever, because we are at the mercy of an ambiguity. Will it last? How will international policy impact domestic policy, and how does that in turn shape our possible responses to continue to stand with and for Palestine? What can we truly expect? I'm a little nervous to be the new person, the new kid on the block who respectfully disagrees with some of my fellow panelists who are perhaps more optimistic than I am. So I want to speak in my personal capacity for just a few minutes, please. You know, if the best predictor of future behavior is in fact past behavior, in my humble opinion, this ceasefire will not last. Historically, we know that ceasefires are not respected by the Israelis, who are serial violators, with one of the most recent violations during Obama's presidency, resulting in the Black Friday incident. Here, Israel has already signaled that it reserves the right to re-engage militarily at any point and that it maintains its aim of destroying Hamas. Meanwhile, Palestinians face slow-walked concessions. 62% of Israelis agree with the statement, "There are no innocents in Gaza." Bezalel Smotrich has demanded a commitment from Netanyahu that he resume the war after completion of the first stage of the deal. Netanyahu has already begun claims that Hamas has violated the terms of the deal, paving the way for his future justification to continue attacks in Gaza. Such pretense and pretext allow him to keep the door of further incursions wide open. And we know that in the face of Israel's 15 months of surplus killings, the US has remained steadfast in its support for Israel's war machine. Within hours of Trump taking office, Israel launched a new assault on the West Bank city of Jenin. Within hours of Trump's executive orders lifting sanctions, Israeli settlers attacked a Palestinian village in the West Bank, injuring at least 21 Palestinians and setting fire to homes, cars, a nursery, and a workshop. I think it's also fair to say, and we all agree, that Biden did not broker this deal, rather Trump did. And the success of this agreement will depend on Trump's policies as president. As one reporter said, Trump now owns the process, the return of all the hostages, the release of more Palestinian prisoners, turning a six-week ceasefire into an end to the war. All of that will be challenging, and its failure or success will determine whether the agreement was simply a respite between rounds or an actual pathway to peace. So again, in my opinion, how do we know it's not an actual pathway to peace? The proof is in the pudding. Trump has already lifted Biden-era sanctions aimed at violent extremist Israeli settlers who have attacked Palestinians in the occupied West Bank. He issued an executive order opening the door to sanctions against the ICC, putting those who try to hold the US and its allies accountable for war crimes at risk of a new round of financial penalties. He greenlit the delivery of thousands of 2,000-pound bombs to Israel that were being held in abeyance by Biden since last summer. The Israeli government was reportedly notified by the Pentagon about the release on Friday, the day before Hamas released 4 hostages as part of the ceasefire agreement. Finally, as CARE itself noted about the latest delusional and dangerous nonsense, he has floated the idea of expelling millions of Palestinians to Egypt and Jordan. We would be fools not to see the writing on the wall. The only thing that really stands in the way of the ceasefire not falling apart, and I defer to the experts on this panel, so forgive me, but the way I see it are those 91 Israeli hostages remaining in Gaza as of last Thursday. So I think it's important for us to try to understand Trump's motives, and it's only speculation, but many have said that what he wanted was just the appearance of peace in order to boost his political capital and then allow the Israelis to continue with their project of annexing large swaths of the West Bank. Additionally, we know he is interested in either a Nobel Peace Prize or an Israeli-Saudi normalization agreement, or both. And we have to concede, as Aaron Miller, writing for the New York Times, said, that it's hard to imagine Trump sanctioning, imposing a serious restriction, or ending the supply of US military equipment to Israel. It's hard to imagine Trump introducing a Security Council resolution at the UN that is highly critical of Israel. It's hard to imagine Trump joining more than 140 other countries in unilaterally recognizing Palestinian statehood. So we have to look at what will remain unchanged even as a result of this ceasefire. Israeli military attempts to continue to seize territory, deepening its 76-year military occupation and the expansion of its settlements, Israel's reservation of the right to keep attacking Palestinians, invoking the age-old tried and true must be self-defense, credible and growing allegations of genocide, attacks on the West Bank. What else will not fail us in this time? Inshallah, Palestinian resistance and insistence on self-determination. It remains to be seen whether the global protest movement against the war and crimes in Gaza loses intensity. So what is left for us to do? I've been asked to speak on the topic of engagement, or on the track of engagement. We have to decide, will we bow our wills to officials who have consistently breached our trust, or will we consistently organize more cohesively amongst ourselves, assert our own power, and utilize it? We should take a page out of the CARE playbook and go with the latter. A new policy has already written about this, that there is an obvious and increasing gap between opposition to US policies and blind support for Israel. That clearly cuts in our favor, and we should take advantage of it. And now I wish to speak on behalf of my amazing organization, As to Engagement. Our power is in our legal strategies, our work to influence policy, and our efforts to mobilize our community. Concretely, echoing much of Phyllis's action plan, we should either begin or continue to oppose efforts to, as everyone has said, pass anti-boycott bills around the country, fight efforts at the federal and state levels to legislate limitations on the freedom of speech, stand against efforts to ban social media apps that facilitate the free flow of information about Gaza, demand an end to the blockade that keeps Gaza in ruins, demand aid to be able to flow freely to the millions who need it, demand that Netanyahu and his cronies be held accountable in accordance with international law, demand that Israel end its illegal apartheid system, demand that Israel withdraw from all occupied Palestinian territories, including the West Bank. And yes, it is important, it is imperative that we keep pushing the US to stop shielding Israel from accountability. I'm with Phyllis 100%. We've got to support UNRWA against efforts to dismantle it. I don't know if that's a lost cause at this point. I also agree with Phyllis, we've got to lobby for the policy of freezing US-held assets of individual Israeli settlers and settler groups, if only for the strong symbolic impact. Advocate for the State Department, Josh would be able to speak to this, to add Israeli settler groups to the US foreign terror organization list. Pressure the new administration to reverse course on sending the bombs, respond to Trump's executive order reopening the possibility of sanctions against the ICC. Senator Lindsey Graham said he's preparing to bring that legislation this week. We need to feed our stories, our cases, and our issues to as many media and social media outlets as possible. The social media campaigns and engagement with the fourth branch of government cannot be underestimated. Allyship with our progressive Jewish activist friends. And on the humanitarian side, we need to support our sister Islamic organizations like Islamic Relief USA and their distribution of food, water, medicine, medical supplies, etc. In sum, again, in my opinion, and I'm almost done, Mohammed, I promise, this fragile ceasefire will not last the night. Frankly, it's not enough, nor was it ever meant to be. It will not rebuild homes, restore hospitals, or bring justice to those whose lives have been destroyed. It is on us to push back against Trump's policies and agenda. I think it would be a mistake for us to look at the past 15 months and say that we did not make a difference. Although there were plenty of times that I thought we could not make a dent. Who were we? How come nothing was changing? What did it matter if the Zionist forces could do whatever they wanted to do anyway? And although I don't view the ceasefire as the culmination of our efforts, I don't think any of us does, I see the rising chorus of strengthened voices, the truth being told unapologetically, and our display of solidarity as the progress and success in and of themselves. The means and the outcomes have melded because they are all centered around resistance. No movement ever simply became an outcome. And so we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow their blood and our sweat and tears to give us eventually victory. I am assured that with information, knowledge, allyship, conscience, and sacrifice, our engagement will indeed lead to that. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Mariam. Our next speaker doesn't really need an introduction, so I'm going to give her a short one. Linda Sarsour, activist, organizer, author, and the executive director of Empower Change. Linda.
Thank you so much, everyone. Salaam alaikum. Thank you to AJP Action, AMP, CARE Action, CARE National, and the U.S. Council of Muslim Organizations for having this conversation. I think it's beautiful to be part of a community that's diverse and maybe even diverse in our feelings. I feel absolutely overwhelmed, but more so with joy. Although we've been through 15 months of genocide, watching the Palestinian people in their defiance, in their resilience. And we've said this for many decades, we will return and we will return. And the people of Gaza were returning. We are watching them literally walk on foot all the way back to their homes in the north of Gaza. They are people with a spirit that cannot be stolen, a spirit that cannot be killed. And those are our people. If you can be someone or a family that has been impacted literally by a genocide and still find a way to find joy and music and be able to take your little kittens and carry your cats, I mean, our people are absolutely unbelievable. I am more prouder to be a Palestinian than I ever have before. We do have a lot of work ahead of us. The challenges are there. But when have there not been challenges for the Palestinian people? When have we seen a time of peace for the Palestinian people? It's been 76 years of a brutal military occupation. Our people went through Nakba, they went through Nexit, they went through different military onslaughts. We have checkpoints, divided families. We have a separation wall. We have an open air prison in Gaza. We have restricted travel of our people from inside and outside of Palestine. We are one of the largest refugee communities in the world. And so I say that all to say that our fight is not around a presidential administration. This is not a 4-year Donald Trump fight. This is a fight that we've been in, many of us and many of our family members and our elders have been in for decades. And we just have to stay consistent and stay focused. Our message doesn't change. It doesn't change because it's Donald Trump or because it's Joe Biden or because it's another president in 2028. We stay focused on the things we've been always asking for and fighting back on the things that have been attacking our movements. The anti-BDS movement and the anti-BDS legislation, we've been fighting those for years in this country. The crackdown on student groups across this country were happening even before the encampments. There are entire school groups that were literally dismantled on campuses like Fordham University. And I remember the days of our dear brother, Alan Levine, who was representing our students in court right here in New York City. So I want people to kind of understand here that our fight has not changed. Our rigor, our diligence in our fight has not changed. But we're also going to be in other fights. And we have to understand that our fight is central to the many fights that we're going to be seeing across this country under an administration like this one. And we have to make sure that Palestine remains part of the conversation. And that's the job of organizers and activists and organizations that are part of coalitions. And that's my role and my job. I have fought for the rights of immigrants and refugees in this country for the last 25 years, and I'm not going to stop now. And the Palestinian people have never been a people that have been just about Palestine. They have shown solidarity to the Syrian people. They have shown solidarity to Black Americans who have been killed at the hands of law enforcement here in the United States. They have shown solidarity to activists here in the US. They have recognized our activism and organizing and advocacy for them all the way from Gaza in the middle of a genocide. So for me, moving forward, I'm thinking about more coalition building, deepening our relationships, continuing the fight for Palestine on a local level. You know, folks have already brought this up. There are still college campuses and student organizations who went right back to campus this past semester and revitalized or started or continued their divestment campaigns. And just recently, there have been a few wins just within the last few weeks that I've been privy to on the internet. And it's beautiful to see our young people are still organizing. I'm also going to say this, all politics is local, and that's kind of where my philosophy has been for the last 25 years. We all have local elections. It's not just about who's in Congress or who is the next president of the United States. It's also about who your local representatives are, who your comptroller is, who are the people that are, watchdogs for your retirement funds. Those are people also who have power, calling on them to divest from Israeli bonds, for example. You know, who are the mayors of your city? For example, in New York, we got some very exciting races coming up in 2025. What races are happening in your local area? The more that we develop people and leaders and elected officials on a local level who are committed to the most marginalized people, who are committed to protecting our immigrant communities, who are committed to standing with all communities justly and equally and fairly, this is how you start building. It always starts at the bottom and it trickles up. And that's what I'm committed to, and I hope you are committed to. So I would suggest that you figure out who's running locally. There are a lot of incredible, I'll give you an example. You know, in New York City, we have a mayoral race there's going to be a Democratic primary primarying our current mayor. Our current mayor has been unapologetically pro-Israel, even during genocide. He is someone who right now is literally colluding with the Trump administration around some of the mass deportation initiatives that Donald Trump wants to implement or is implementing in some places around the country. And we have people who are going to primary our mayor. And usually in New York City, the mayor usually gets 2 terms. This one's about to get 1 term. And one of those candidates that's running against Eric Adams in New York is a young Indian American, Ugandan-born Muslim named Zohran Mamdani. He is unapologetically pro-Palestine. And also, he happened to be one of the champions of a piece of legislation in the New York's legislature, of course, that has not passed yet, but the conversation around it has been incredible and courageous and important around sanctioning New York organizations who support settler organizations in illegal settlements in Israel. And that's important because there's a lot of folks who are operating under nonprofits and doing things that are not in the purview of being a nonprofit. So again, there are exciting local races happening across the country, and I want people to focus there. But I also feel like people need a political home. There's too much information every day. Donald Trump did this. Donald Trump signed this legislation or signed this, executive order. And I think you need to be part of an organization. So if you are not part of an organization, join organizations like AMP, join organizations like CARE, like Empower Change, so you could stay informed about what's happening around you, so we could help translate some of what we're hearing, so we know what is accurate, what is not accurate, what is hyperbole, what is something that is actually implementable. Because this type of administration, they are master manipulators, masters of chaos and disinformation, and we want to make sure that people feel like they can get information and they can operate from a place where they are well informed. And also, I'll say that there are some challenges that are going to be coming up that we have to be aware of. For example, this nonprofit killer bill that folks had defeated prior to Donald Trump coming in. Now we have a trifecta, meaning that we have a Republican Congress, a Republican Senate, and also a Republican White House. This bill is going to come up again, and it could be very likely that it could pass, which could hurt pro-Palestinian advocacy organizations or any group that shows any support for Palestinian human rights. And so we need to be all careful. People need to make sure that they are diligent and vigilant about their finances, that folks' books are in order. We don't know what this government is capable of. So we just got to make sure that everybody's good to go, because we know that what we're doing is the right thing. We are not afraid. We're going to continue to stand up for the Palestinian people, and we're going to fight for our neighbors right here in New York, in Chicago, in Texas, wherever you live. We're going to fight for our neighbors. And lastly, I'll just say this, a message to folks here. The one thing that is not helpful at all in this moment is to continue to be upset or salty about an election that already happened. It already happened. Millions of Americans stayed home and did not vote in this past election, and we have to reflect on that. So for me, I'm an organizer. I like to be outside. This is how I usually look. I was going to wear something nicer, but this is literally what I wear when I go outside to organize. We got to go talk to our neighbors. We got to lean into our family members. We got to listen to people's fears, their concerns, their dreams, and their aspirations. We cannot continue this partisan work. We cannot continue my team, their team, those people, these people. We are all a community, regardless of what our, where we lean ideologically. There are people in our communities that care about whether or not their children are getting high quality education. They care about having access to healthcare. They care about making sure that they have living and fair wages. There are a lot of things that bring us together. And sometimes we're just going to have those courageous conversations with our neighbors so that we never find ourselves in this situation ever again. I think for me, a lot of what we're seeing today of this, mass, I don't even know what to call it. It's like an avalanche of bad executive orders in the last week. A lot of that I blame on Democrats and the Democratic Party that brought us here. I don't blame individual voters around this country who did not feel like they belonged to any party, and they felt unheard. They felt marginalized. They felt like nobody cared about them. And many of them stayed home. And I think now they're starting to see what that meant for them. But at the same time, I'm not going to sit here and blame my neighbors for the moment. I'm going to move forward, and I'm going to organize, and I'm going to build infrastructure, and I'm going to think about what Palestine needs for the next 10 years. Because again, this is not a 4-year fight. This is not a us versus Donald Trump fight. The fight for Palestinian freedom has stretched decades, and we have much more to go. And the only way that we're going to do this is together. So I'm very grateful to be with all the folks that are here on this call.
Thank you so much for your words, Linda. I feel like every time we're able to be in your presence, it's a breath of fresh air. Maybe it's that Brooklyn in you, but appreciate it. Our next speaker is Bassem Al Qarra. Bassem Al Qarra has served as the executive director of the Sacramento Valley Central California office. I'm sorry, it's both nice weather, mashallah. For CARE. He is originally from Gaza. He has lost over 113 family members in the massacres resulting from the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Bassem is the only Muslim to have sued both Trump and Biden. In 2017, he sued Donald Trump to challenge the Muslim ban and recently sued Biden, Blinken, and Austin for their complicity in the ongoing genocide in Gaza. Recently, Bassem has transitioned to become the National Executive Director of CARE Action. Without further ado, Bassem.
Thank you. Assalamu alaikum, dear community. I want to thank all those that protested, that pressured their elected officials at all levels to support ceasefires, those that were out in the encampments. And just want to say that the people of Gaza were paying attention, are still paying attention, and we are their hope. In Mawasi, on their tents, they put the names of the universities that held the encampments to show their solidarity. So, and for the first time since 1948, Palestinians have returned en masse. We saw the Lebanese returning to the south. Our people are resilient and should inspire us all to continue the fight for political justice. But we can't get complacent. The West Bank is on fire with daily pogroms. And how will we ensure that this genocide stops? Now, I'm going to talk briefly about our community's political response and our next steps. So most of our community, we're used to 501c3 nonprofit organizations. So in this context for CARE, the 501c3 empowers, protects, and mobilizes the community. But 501c3s have limitations, right? Limited lobbying, cannot endorse candidates. So the Muslim American community needed a new entity to unify and coordinate our political efforts. So we took CARE California Action that was launched in 2019, and we took it national, rebranded it under CARE Action after the genocide. We built sustainable infrastructure with a 501c4, CARE Action, a political action committee, a PAC with CARE Action PAC, and an endorsed super PAC. Alhamdulillah, we have an experienced team with decades of political advocacy, lobbying, and PAC experience. We've traveled from cities around the nation, met with leaders and activists from coast to coast. And I want to thank my dear sister Linda, who was instrumental in helping us around the country. We've had mergers with other organizations. We're in talks with national organizations to unify and merge our efforts. The mission is simple: to engage, educate, and mobilize Muslim voters, train emerging leaders, and champion policy priorities that enhance the well-being and representation of Muslim communities. So we're working in education, coalition building, advocacy, lobbying, and endorsements. I want to say for the first time in our community's history, the CARE Action team last year worked with over 100 leaders and activists on the ground and did endorsements in 16 states. 16 states. And our community had, alhamdulillah, major victories against AIPAC last year. Just in one race in Southern California, the community helped defeat an AIPAC member of Congress by 654 votes. I repeat, 654 votes. So your vote does matter. And many seats now are won by around 1,000 or 2,000 votes. Local races are won by just a few hundred votes. Now, I'll just say this. I don't blame our community for not being as involved in the political process. Over the years, there was no organization at a national level doing these endorsement guides, telling people who to vote for. Me as an elected official, I even sometimes have to call some friends and ask, hey, who do we vote for in this judicial race? So we can't expect the average community member to do all this research and figure it out on their own. So now, alhamdulillah, there's no excuse not to vote and build our political power. We have experts on the ground that are working with community leaders and activists to come up with these endorsement guides. We want to go from 16 to, inshallah, almost every state in the country, inshallah. The PAC, why a PAC? So because a C4, 501c4, cannot raise money for elected officials and candidates. And this is going to allow CARE Action PAC to host fundraisers for candidates and elected officials around the country in an organized fashion, in a strategic fashion, to support and protect our allies. Now imagine when we have, inshallah, 50 chapters around the country, working with one strategy at a national level, but also locally to be the margin of victory at local and state levels, inshallah. We inshallah, will no longer be taken for granted. You look at the IMEU recent poll that was released just this past week that showed the folks that voted in 2020 that did not vote in 2024. And the number one reason for that was genocide. Genocide is not good politics. And so we have to keep pushing, and we have to keep pushing that narrative that's the reason why the Democrats lost. Now, I have some good news to share. Now, just in this past few days, there's a big election happening for the DNC chair. Now, every single candidate for DNC chair has agreed to establish a Muslim caucus. So we can ensure that our community has a voice at the table. And alhamdulillah, and our community has the power, and we must wield it at every opportunity, inshallah. So to conclude, help us build around the nation by joining all the organizations that are here tonight and all the organizations that are working on uplifting the political voice of the community by joining their email list, donating to these organizations. And for CARE Action, help us establish an office in your city. In the upcoming months, please join the USCMO National Advocacy Day in Washington, D.C. on Capitol Hill. Alhamdulillah, last year was a great success, and every year we should increase to make sure that we have thousands from around the country that come to Capitol Hill and make sure that our voice is heard in the halls of the Capitol. It's only when we unite and work together that we can build power, and I look forward to working with all of you.
Thank you so much for your words, Bassem, and for those who are interested, please keep up with the USCMO as they announce their upcoming lobby day. We had a few questions come on, and we have about 15 minutes just to go through some of them. I'm going to start with Josh. Josh, you've explained before that continuing arms shipments to Israel is not only immoral, but is illegal according to U.S. law. The Trump admin seems not to care much for either. What do you see happening in the near future? Will we see resignations from the Trump admin as we did under Biden's, or will this genocide continue, or will they continue, or will they leave because of this ongoing genocide if it continues after the 42-day mark has passed?
Yeah, thanks, Mohammed. There's a lot to unpack there. So I think the first thing I would say is that I would not expect a significant shift in US arms transfer policy, or for that matter, security assistance policy towards Israel under the Trump administration. When the Trump administration decided to pause all foreign assistance, it paused all foreign assistance except for military financing for Israel and Egypt. And I think that, for example, right now, there are $8 billion approximately worth of arms sales pending before Congress that I expect President Trump will move into formal notification in the near future. So I don't know that there are going to be any significant shifts there. When it comes to resignations, so the Trump administration sent out an email today from the Office of Personnel Management that went to every federal employee that basically gave people an offer that said, you can, if you want to keep working from home, you can submit your resignation effective the end of September, and we will keep paying you until then. Now, Senator Chris Murphy has already popped up to say quite rightly, there is no law that permits that. Don't trust it. And I've heard from people in the State Department who received that email today who've said, this is probably just a way of sounding out where the quote unquote weak links are in order to fire them. So yes, there will be a lot of people leaving government in the coming days, weeks, and months. I think those who wanted to leave government because of the US actions in Gaza and support to Israel's genocide there have already left. Sure, there will be some for whom that is yet another contributing factor, but I think that the debate has shifted, unfortunately, in the sense that now this is going to be a much broader debate about President Trump's policies. And I think that's not necessarily a terrible thing in the sense that this is an opportunity, as others on this panel have said, to build coalitions. There are going to be a lot of people who didn't speak up in the last 15 months, who need people to speak up for them now. And that is the opportunity for us to stand together. As Benjamin Franklin said when he signed the Declaration of Independence, we must all hang together, or most assuredly, we will all hang separately. And so it is by building those coalitions with federal workers, with immigrants, with migrants, with the African American community, with all sorts of communities across America who are going to be going through a hard time. If we speak for them, they may be more likely to speak for us. And I think that that is the real path forward, and continuing to push as well on the DNC and through the Democrats, so that once there is a real viable opposition party again in this country, it is one that puts the Palestinian issue front and center, because I do believe, as goes Palestine, so goes America.
Thank you, Josh. Dr. Hatem, you mentioned in your talk that there are organizations that are documenting the atrocities that happened in Gaza and documenting the atrocities across Palestine. What organizations are doing so, and how can people like us support their initiatives?
The Genocide Tribunal for Gaza, led by Richard Falk, and he brought together a large cluster of people, divided into 3 different groupings. There's been a couple of meetings on that, and there's a follow-up. So there is an effort underway specifically on the genocide and the tribunal, with documentations, with a sizable legal team also involved in this process. So I think that's taking place on the Genocide Tribunal. On the university level, I think it's very important at this time to push for cementing Palestine studies outfits and Palestine studies in different universities. It's not only to continue to oppose U.S. policies and to oppose what is taking place relative to Israel, but it's important to narrate Palestine within the landscape of academia. And I would have to say positively, UC Berkeley have already actually created the Palestine Studies program with an endowed chair. Just today, this morning, UC Santa Cruz actually have sent out a lecturer position that is open in the anthropology department for a person to teach 2 courses on Palestine. These are very, very important, because it actually begins to actually create the intellectual, the academic productivity that will have a long-term shape in there. So I think it's very important, as we speak about the genocide on the tribunal and the documentation, part of that is actually training and providing the space for incoming students and incoming new generation to engage in Palestine in ways that is very, very different, but is also grounding in research and grounding in work. Because I do think that the genocide issue will be with us for 15 to 20 years. If we just followed the Bosnian genocide and what took place, in terms of the Rwanda genocide and what took place. So it actually involved many different tiers to it. So I think that's how we need to think, rather than think of a day or 2 or a month or 2 or even a year or 2. I think it's very, very important to have this long-term lens to it. And I do encourage people, if you are within the landscape of academia, within a university, don't fall for just, we're going to give you a halal service in the cafeteria at the university just to address anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian racism. I could find about 23 halal restaurants around the campus. What I need is actually transformative change that takes place within academic institutions. So take Harvard to task, take Yale to task, NYU, all these universities who basically they like their Palestinians on the side or Muslim on the side. No, we need to be center stage, and those are the things that you need to demand and ask for as we move forward.
Thank you, Dr. Hatem. Nihad, you've been a leader in the Muslim community for more than 3 decades. You've experienced and gone through some of the most tumultuous periods in U.S. history and helped navigate these challenges with the American Muslim community. What is different about this moment, this genocide in Gaza, in comparison with what you've experienced before and what you have worked through before?
Well, that's a big question. Well, Many things, actually. This is an unprecedented genocide. This is the most documented, the most broadcast live genocide in human history. So it shook not only our conscience, it shook us to the core, shook the world to the core. And despite the fact that Israel prevented international media from being there, they claim that this is for their own safety, but I think it wanted to hide its war crimes. Despite that, it could not control the social media. It could not control the will of Palestinians using primitive tools to find solar, cells, to use even bikes to charge their phones and batteries, to allow for those images to be present and to expose Israel. So that's really the magnitude of the genocide is unprecedented. The other thing is, in the past, our community suffered by itself in silence. In this genocide, the world was speaking 24/7, loudly and clearly to the hypocrisy of Western governments, especially the United States, European governments, especially those who, like Germany, for example, where the Holocaust mainly, it happened, of course, it happened in other European countries, but it exposed their hypocrisy. They wanted, not to blame Israel, but at the expense of humanity. Thirdly, I think the young people took to the streets and I think they were directing the narratives. The mainstream media, the legacy media failed to cover up. In fact, they started just to be there to catch up with social media, but they failed. Look like Piers Morgan, for example, with his crazy pro-Israel narrative, had to come around at points because it helped even his show to bring a Palestinian or pro-Palestine. So that is all important. And fourthly, I think young Jewish activists and significant sectors of the Jewish community came out and organized loudly. And also they organized by themselves. They did not want others to be with them because they want to show that this is not about faith. It is about Zionism. It is not about Judaism versus Islam or Arabs and Muslims. This is, settler colonial hegemony versus the world. And I think that was unprecedented. And finally, I would say, in the past tragedies, we were just growing. Today, we are stronger. CARE in the past year filed a lawsuit against the state of Texas and won. Filed a lawsuit against the state of Florida and won. Managed to defeat, what's his name? The Florida governor, DeSantis, and also Greg Abbott, governor of Texas, when they ordered universities to shut down pro-Palestine organizations like GPS, MSA, and others. We won a case over time almost against the University of Maryland for not allowing interfaith student groups to have their own vigil. I also should really mention MLFA. MLFA has been a strong partner and huge and fearless defender of human rights and civil rights of the Muslim community since 9/11. So I would say today our community is much stronger. Look, CARE has 70 full-time attorneys, and we are willing to take a charge. We have many iconic leaders, mashallah. We have them here, and we have allies like Josh, like Phyllis Bennis. All of you have been part of this movement, and our movement is really universal, is unstoppable. And now we just need to continue, as I said in my remarks. We have to pass legislation, and we should not give up if we get defeated. I mean, I was trying to Google, Thomas Edison, how many times he did, his experiment Of course, he did not repeat it the same, but he changed, different ways, maybe 1,000 or more times. And look, the light that we are enjoying for centuries all over the world, in our homes, in our factories, in our schools, in our hospitals. That is the power of not giving up. And I think our movement is not giving up and has seen the fruit of its struggle.
Thank you, Nihad. Phyllis, as we discuss the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the ceasefire, we know that the situation in the West Bank, and it's been mentioned multiple times, the situation in the West Bank is getting much worse. And we saw just last week as Trump made sure that one of his first actions when it came to Palestine was to lift sanctions off of these settler orgs in the West Bank. Obviously, we know from previous iterations of this government, as well as the current Israeli government, that eyes are on the West Bank, eyes are on annexation of the West Bank. How should we be looking at this situation, and what should we as activists, as organizers, be paying attention to in this moment?
Ooh, big questions, Mohammed. We have to pay attention to all of it. That's the starting point. Obviously, not all of us can pay attention to everything, but collectively, we need to be paying attention to everything that's going on in the West Bank, because as we know, this is the centerpiece of what the Nakba was about. This is the centerpiece of what ethnic cleansing is aimed at. Gaza, in some ways, was not the main target. Gaza was a target of convenience, if you will, from the Israeli effort at expulsion and of genocide. And the real goal is ethnic cleansing of the West Bank. In the context of how it plays out, we will see whether it's in the context of the earlier Trump positions from 2018 and 2019, from his first trip to Israel. Remember, he already changed U.S. positions, which remained through the 4 years of the Biden administration. Biden campaigned and then said that he would end what Trump had done, moving the embassy to Jerusalem, recognizing the settlements as legal, recognizing the Golan Heights as somehow belonging to Israel, the Syrian Golan Heights, all of these things. And I have no doubt that Biden did disagree. But what he did not do was change the policy. He didn't need Congress to do that. These were statements by the president that could have been reversed and were not. So they remain in effect. They remained in effect for the 2 years of the last 2 years of the first Trump administration, the 4 years of the Biden administration, and they are in effect now. So the challenge for us is to keep reminding the world that there is something about international law that preempts these kinds of unilateral decisions by US presidents. US presidents don't have the right to say that the Golan Heights belongs to Israel. This is Syrian territory, period, full stop. The US presidents do not have the right to say that, well, they have the right to say it, but they don't have the right to make true the idea that Israeli settlements across the West Bank are legal. They are illegal not because some other country says it, but because international law states it. And this is not about some vague notion of the kind of new language that we hear. Instead of hearing about international law, we hear about, we're going to have new ideas about a rule-based international order. Well, the rules-based international order doesn't exist. It exists only in what the US says it is. What does exist is international law. It doesn't get implemented most of the time. It is more often breached than not, but it does exist. You can look it up. It's in black and white in the books. What is international law? What are the laws of war? What are the Geneva Conventions? What is the Convention Against Genocide? What is the Convention Against Apartheid? These are real aspects of law that we can fight for. And the importance, I think, of the action in the International Court of Justice, the action that South Africa brought, was, first of all, a huge shift away from the notion that institutions like the ICJ belong to the colonial powers, that they do not belong to the global South. South Africa said, no, we don't accept that anymore. We are going to seize this and use it as our own because we are part of international law being implementing. In that context, they have given us a tool because, as we know, the international laws that are imposed by the International Court of Justice are not self-enforcing. The statement is true that the decisions made by the ICJ are enforceable, but they don't have, not only do they not have an army, they don't have a police force, they don't have a process server, they don't have anybody to make good on their decisions. What they have is a tool to say, for example, these are the initial measures that we are going to take until we can make a full determination. So there are 6 things Israel was required to do. And then again, there were 2 more things. They don't have the enforcement capacity, but we do. That's the lesson we can learn from South African apartheid and the global struggle against it. What changed US policy on apartheid against South Africa was not that the US or that President then Ronald Reagan changed his mind and decided that this was somehow a good thing. They hated it. But it became too much pressure to bear when virtually every allied country, as well as the rest of the world that had already moved, allied countries across Europe, across the other countries allied with the United States, changed their position to say, we stand against apartheid in South Africa. We are going to boycott. We are going to impose sanctions against South Africa, the banking sanctions, the corporate sanctions. And enough countries did that when the US, in the form of then the Black Caucus of the Congress, which at that time served as the conscience of the Congress, something that we don't have so strongly on international issues anymore. But when they did, and they held that up as the example, finally the US collapsed and said, okay, we give in. We will support sanctions against apartheid South Africa. And that was the most important single action by another country that made it possible for the South Africans themselves ultimately to overthrow apartheid. That model is the same thing. If we look at all the countries now that are joining South Africa, that are supporting South Africa, the resolution that was passed in the United Nations General Assembly, that was this extraordinary level, I'm forgetting the numbers now, I think it was 148 to 7, as I recall, something like that. It was an overwhelming level of support of countries that are supporting everything that the International Court of Justice called for, and then some. That's now up to us to bring that back to the United States and say, we don't want to be the outliers here. You are making us an outlier just like Israel. You are making us a country that no one else respects, that some countries may be afraid of, but that nobody sees as an ally. And that's not the world we want to live in. So this is part of changing that world. What we demand for Palestinian rights is also part of what we demand for the country and the world we want to live in. So that's what gives us power. We've been given a tool by the International Court of Justice. It's up to us to hold that up and use that tool.
Thank you, Phyllis. And surprisingly, we are at the end of our time. We have one more question before we go. Linda, you have been organizing for years, and you organized under the first Trump administration. For many people right now, it's a little bit of deja vu. This first week feels like it's been a year already. And many people are, for lack of a better term, beginning to worry and not know what's next. Obviously, we mentioned a little bit earlier that we are in a Republican trifecta. How can we as Muslim Americans, as minority Americans who are being targeted, effectively organize and advocate under this Republican trifecta? And what are the key considerations that should be made as we are navigating this political landscape?
Thank you, Mohammed. I did organize under the first Donald Trump administration. I always tell people I was alive then and I'm still alive, so that I'm a survivor of Trump 1.0. I'll just say this, and I said this earlier, really it's always about organizing locally. And I think one of the moments in my organizing career that I'm very proud of is actually not the Women's March or things of that nature. People think it's always the more flashy things that people see. It's actually during COVID. I was so proud to be part of mutual aid networks here in New York City, being able to take care of my neighbors, being able to go buy groceries for the elderly and those with disabilities and on my street. And I was so proud of the work. And it wasn't just me, it was thousands and thousands of people across the country who took care of one another. And that's what we're going to do in the next 4 years. They're going to, you want to strip people of food stamps? Well, I'm going to feed my neighbors. I'm going to make sure that at least the people that are around me are not going to go hungry. I'm going to make sure that my local city council commits to remaining a sanctuary city, that we're going to protect our immigrant families. We're going to develop networks here and we're doing this already across the country. If God forbid any of our undocumented neighbors or parents are taken away, that we're able to take their children, we're able to be into contact with their families, making sure that these children find safe havens, that the government doesn't take these children, and put them into the system. We got to stay local. We got to be leaned into what's happened on a very hyper local level. Do not be overconsumed by news that's coming out of the media. A lot of it is going to be clickbait, and we have to be responsible people, especially advocates and activists, and not share things that are not verified. And I wrote a post today to just in general, saying to people that we have to make distinctions about things that are happening. Do not scare our undocumented families. Don't instill fear in them. Don't just put out a post that ICE is on this corner and that corner just because you saw it on the internet. If you have not verified it yourself, if you have not been in touch with an immigrant rights organization that is monitoring these things, or local elected officials that you trust in your community, do not put this information out. So a lot of the next 4 years is going to be about us streamlining information and making sure that we are not spreading disinformation on the internet. It's going to be about hyper-local organizing and building relationships with our local mosques and churches, making sure that they continue to be safe havens for undocumented people and other marginalized people. And along the way, in the next 4 years, people will be sacrificed, just like they were sacrificed in the first administration, meaning that I'm not going to lie to you here and say that no one will be harmed, that somehow we're just going to be perfect. A lot of people are going to be harmed. And that is going to be an unfortunate and an outrageous, and it's going to be a tragedy. But you know what? This country has been in many tragedies. We have seen outrageous moments of injustice in this country. And a lot of us come from communities, and a lot of our allies come from communities, again, where their ancestors survived those tragedies, meaning that we are still here because somebody sacrificed before us. So we have to just stay vigilant. We have to stay bold. We have to stay clear-eyed, and we cannot stop organizing and giving up and saying, well, there's a trifecta. There's nothing that we could do. I live in a city with a Democratic mayor, a Democratic city council. I have a Democratic governor. I have a Democratic state legislator, and that's the people I'm going to organize. And a lot of people, even who live in red states, are living in municipalities that are not red, and making sure that they create communities where other people can come and find safe havens. This is an opportunity for business owners to be involved in developing these safe havens and places that people can feel safe around. So the work is happening, Mohammed. Just again, people need to find a political home, join an organization, support an elected official who's running in your community, who's someone that aligns with your values. And I'm going to tell Trump he's wrong. I'm going to tell him that I'm outraged at what he's doing. I'm going to tell him not to do it. It doesn't mean that I'm going to believe that Trump is not going to do what I tell him not to do, but I'm going to be on the record. And we as a generation, and all of us here and everyone else that's watching, you have to be on the record. You have to be able to say that when Donald Trump was the president, I said things. I went outside. I organized. And you know what? I also organized under Joe Biden, and I told Joe Biden a whole lot of things too. And this idea of being consistent in our morals and principles and values and not being beholden to any political party is going to really help us build a type of consensus that we never seen in this country. And I appreciate people who are doing that. For example, I think about a new policy. A new policy is a new policy. It's a new policy that can be an organization that's going to try to build consensus around getting support for an issue versus saying we're with the Democrats, we're with the Republicans, or even Care Action. Like, I'm with whoever's with me. I'm with whoever's going to protect me. I'm with whoever's going to provide me health care. I am with the people who stand with human rights and the dignity of all people. That is who I'm going to stand with politically. And so anyway, there's a lot of work to do, Mohammed. We're not going to lie to anyone. But the last thing that I'll say is, we got to stand up for one another. So for those folks that are watching, for us that are here, I'm going to stand up for AMP when AMP is getting attacked. I'm going to stand up for CARE when CARE is being attacked. If somebody goes after Josh Paul, I'm going to say, hands off Josh Paul. That's my guy. Phyllis already knows I'm a fight outside for Phyllis. And MLFA and ICNA and MAS and all these organizations that are out here doing the great work in our Muslim communities, they're going to be under attack. And we know that. And what we're going to do is we're going to band together. We're not going to leave anybody out. We're going to fight for our people. We're going to fight together. And inshallah, we're going to prevail. And soon enough, we're going to also, all of us are going to go on a trip together. All the people on this, not the people watching yet, you have to figure out, but I'm going to offer that all of us on this call one day are going to go on a beautiful trip and visit a beautiful and free Palestine. And it is going to be because of the work of the incredible people here and the many others that are doing this great work.
Thank you for that, Linda. And thank you to all of our amazing speakers. For those of you who are interested in the crucial work that our speakers, these organizations are doing, feel free to follow them on social media, whether it's CARE Action, the MLFA, A New Policy, Empower Change, AMP, or anyone else. And again, thank you to everyone who joined us today, and stay in touch. Keep following the USCMO for our upcoming events and upcoming initiatives. Thank you all and have a wonderful night.